You just wrote the end on your 90-page script. You hand it to a friend, they are reading it when they look up and ask, "What is this part about?" Your heart sinks. A gaping plot hole has emerged in your story. To fix it, you will have to change everything. How did you miss it? There's gotta be a better way. Well, there is. One of the worst things I face when writing a screenplay is when I get to the end and discover I just created a glaring plot hole and the story now is confusing as heck. So why do plot holes hurt your screenplay so much? Let's start by understanding what a plot hole is, or at least my interpretation of it. A plot hole in a story is when either a story beat comes out of nowhere without explanation, or there's something set up that is never paid off. Another hole might be when the character's motivation changes, or they do something out of character. It's really not much more complicated than that. The biggest problem you run into when it comes to plot holes is that they leave your reader confused, lost, or even rolling their eyes. It is one way to show that you might need to spend a little more time learning the craft of storytelling before they are willing to invest their time or money into your project, whether it is in viewing or reading or maybe even funding. Plot holes can make things incredibly difficult to fix when you do find them. You might have a 90-page screenplay and find that you introduced a new story beat on page 80. Now you have to go back to the beginning and figure out how to set that story beat up. It might change the order or action of the story. It could introduce a new character, maybe even change an entire scene. Now your task as a writer is to go in and fix those pages. But then it might create a domino effect and introduce changes throughout the rest of the story, just to fix the plot hole you created on page 80. This is extremely time consuming when you discover them after you have finished your screenplay. Unfortunately, it happens to the best of us, and any committed screenwriter should strive to join the best of us. Someday, Jared, someday. But there is a way to prevent this from happening. Fixing a screenplay after you wrote it is like trying to repair a house after you built it. Adding on rooms and additions after you have an entire house complete is not the most efficient way to build a house. Same goes for a screenplay. A lot of your problems can be fixed if you map it out ahead of time. One thing that I constantly am doing is mapping out my stories before putting the first words to the page. It is an easy way to discover if you have enough depth to the story to support the page count. You can then create all your setups, builds, and payoffs to know where you're headed. Don't think of this as a blueprint though. Think of it as a guide that helps direct you to the end goal. It allows for you to still have those creative discoveries when writing, which I think is important to adding your voice to a story. Let's explain the setup, build, payoff structure I'm referring to. This is the heart of where plot holes emerge. The setup. This is where you present the situation, character, or obstacle. Here is where you can provide context to what is important about whatever story beat or plot point you are introducing into your story. I wish I had a taco, or a scene where the character is crafting the perfect taco for a friend. I'm a black belt in karate. Did you know that? Or maybe a scene where your character is being awarded a black belt. I just rebuilt my car engine and I added 100 horsepower, or maybe a whole restoration setup and then going to the track to test their speed in the quarter mile. While seemingly insignificant, those simple lines or even full scenes can be a major setup for major events that happen later in the screenplay. Make note of these, write them down, and then add them to your outline. Just know they exist. The build, or for me, I often refer to the build as escalation. Story beats that put the character through the ringer, make it more difficult for them, and reinforce the context that was presented in the setup. Unable to find a place to eat or getting sick from bad ingredients, facing a bully or getting beat up by someone stronger, car breaking down or losing a race. These are all elements that potentially make it worse for your character and build on what you have set up earlier. Making sure you include the build is how people begin to believe and connect with your character. They can experience the stakes and start to root for or against them. The payoff. This and the setup are where most of the problems arise. Either you introduce something that is so out of context because there wasn't a proper setup, or you never pay off something that was introduced earlier, which causes people to question why it was ever in the story to begin with. A common rule you might hear is that if you introduce a gun in Act 1, it needs to be fired by Act 3. Obviously, there are exceptions and ways to bend this rule, but the idea is that if you introduce something significant, you have to pay it off later. Winning a Michelin star for their well-crafted taco, or as simple as knowing where to get or not to get the best taco when on a date. The audience believes they are skilled in the craft of making tacos because of what they went through. Winning the karate competition or being able to defend themselves, maybe they saved someone because of their karate skills and Chuck Norris or Mr. Miyagi congratulate them because of it. If you know, you know. Maybe they win a race or they are able to help a stranger with a broken car because they are a skilled mechanic. Maybe it's a matter of getting a beater truck started because someone is chasing them and they need to get away. You set up that they know their way around a vehicle, and them fixing something on the fly is now far more believable. So this little pro tip isn't the only pro tool I use for crafting stories and finding inspiration. Besides finding plot holes in my story and fixing them, I also am always searching for inspiration that will help me tell better stories. One way I find inspiration is with music. Spotify or YouTube music playlists are great, but when you go to make your movie, you can sometimes run into the problem of temp love. You're very likely not going to be able to land a licensing deal to use the next Taylor Swift track. Enter Arlist. I've been using Arlist for years, and one thing that I do all the time is create playlists for various projects. Whether it is a client project, passion project, or a YouTube video, I build out a playlist of tracks that inspire the mood and pacing of what I want to create. This becomes a soundtrack I write to. Then when I make a video, I already have permission to use the music. It's kind of great. It's no longer temp love, but closer to a custom score as you ideate. The bonus, you can also find stock footage, sound effects, LUTs, and templates. If you need a cool motion graphics segment, find one you like and drop it in. Signing up with my link helps support this channel and gets you an additional 2 months free when you sign up for a yearly license. But here's the kicker. My secret tool that makes it way easier to accomplish this in less time and without having to scroll through pages of outlines and notes. I implement the story clock method that I believe was crafted by Dan Harmon, pushed hard by Seth Worley, and modified by me to use how I like to use it. So the story clock. It is a circle set up like an analog clock. I divide mine into 25 markers or 25 story beats. Then I start dropping in my story outline around the circle and mark up what each beat might be categorized as. Is it a setup, a build, or a payoff? Each setup or storyline I will either color or label so that I can keep track of it all. Here is where the beauty of the story clock comes in. With an outline, you might have your setup on page 1, but then the payoff is somewhere on page 2, maybe page 3 if the outline gets really detailed. You have to flip through the pages or scroll a bunch. With a story clock, you have one glance and you can see if you have paid off the setup, but just glancing around the clock or circle. If you want to get even more detailed, draw connecting lines for each storyline. Then you can see how many you have going on and if you need to scale back. With all my outlining endeavors, I have found this to be the fastest and most fun. If you feel like telling a specifically symmetrical story with every event mirrored perfectly, this will help you. But the most important thing here is you can quickly identify your plot holes and fix them before you ever write a word of your screenplay. Maybe we should call it the plot hole eliminator. If you want to go beyond just actions of a setup, build, payoff, and create characters that you want to spend time with as they go through these moments, then check out this video here where I talk about how Tarantino does it for his characters. As always, you can find links to resources and gear in the descriptions below.